Richard, a wealthy businessman in his late 40s, had always been a man of great success. He had built his fortune from scratch through hard work and determination. His family's business, a conglomerate with interests in real estate, finance, and technology, was one of the most respected and successful in the country. Before marrying Richard, Anastasia had come from a lower middle-class family. She had always dreamed of a better life, and Richard had provided her with just that. With his wealth and influence, Anastasia had been able to live a life of luxury and ease. She had never had to work a day in her life, and her every need was catered to by the army of staff that Richard employed. Despite her privileged life, Anastasia was not content to simply sit back and enjoy her good fortune. She was a woman with a keen sense of ambition and a desire to secure her place in society. She was a devoted mother to her 3 daughters, and she spared no expense in ensuring that they had every opportunity to succeed in life. The 3 daughters, Sophia, Olivia, and Ava, were the apples of their parents' eyes. They were beautiful, intelligent, and charming, with a confidence and poise that belied their young ages. Sophia, the eldest, was a brilliant student and a talented musician. Olivia, the middle child, was a budding artist with a passion for painting and design. Ava, the youngest, was a precocious and charming child who was always getting into mischief. Richard's life had been a picture of perfection for years. He had a beautiful wife, 3 lovely daughters, and a successful business empire. However, his world was turned upside down when he received a call from a woman he had not seen or heard from in decades. Sandra, his high school lover, was on the other end of the line, and she had some shocking news to share. As Richard listened to Sandra's words, he felt like he had been punched in the gut. She told him that they had a son together, a boy named Anthony who was now 18 years old. Sandra explained that when she became pregnant, her parents had taken her to Switzerland to have the baby, away from the prying eyes of their wealthy community. They had wanted to avoid the scandal of having a teenage daughter with a child out of wedlock. Richard's mind was reeling as he tried to process this information. He had never known that Sandra was pregnant, and he had always assumed that their brief romance had been just that brief. Despite his initial shock, Richard agreed to meet Anthony and help him with a bone marrow transplant. Anthony was in desperate need of the transplant, and Richard was a match. As Richard prepared to meet his son for the first time, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. He was excited to meet Anthony, but he was also nervous about how this would affect his life and his family. When Richard finally met Anthony, he was struck by the young man's kind and gentle nature. Anthony was not a brilliant child academically, but he had a good heart and a strong sense of loyalty. Richard was immediately drawn to his son and felt a deep sense of love and connection. Despite Anthony's academic struggles, Richard loved him unconditionally and was grateful to have him in his life. As Richard spent more time with Anthony, he began to realize just how much he had missed out on by not being a part of his son's life. He was determined to make up for lost time and to be the best father he could be to Anthony. Little did he know, however, that his wife Anastasia had other plans, and she would stop at nothing to protect her own interests and her family's legacy. As the days turned into weeks, Anthony became a regular fixture in the household. Richard's daughters, Sophia, Olivia, and Ava, adored their new brother and welcomed him into their lives with open arms. They would spend hours talking, laughing, and playing together, and Richard would often join in, feeling grateful to have such a loving and close-knit family. Anthony settled into his new life. Richard began to think about the future and how he could provide for his son. He knew that he had to make some changes to his will, and he decided to add Anthony as the sole heir to the family business. This was in line with his family's tradition, where the eldest son inherited the business and the family's wealth. However, Richard also wanted to ensure that his daughters were well taken care of. He decided to set up a trust fund for each of them, which they would receive from the age of 18. The trust fund would provide them with a hefty sum of money, which they could use to pursue their passions and interests. Despite the fact that Anthony was the sole heir to the company, Richard's daughters would still be well provided for, and they would have the financial security to live their lives as they saw fit. Richard's decision to add Anthony to his will and set up trust funds for his daughters was met with a mixture of emotions from Anastasia. On the surface, she appeared to be supportive and welcoming of Anthony into their family. However, beneath the surface, she was seething with resentment and anger. She had always envisioned her own son as the heir to the family business, and now that Anthony had come onto the scene, she felt like her plans were being threatened. Anastasia tried to hide her disgust and built a fake relationship with Anthony. She would smile and laugh with him, pretending to be interested in his life and his interests. However, it was all just an act, and she was secretly resentful of Anthony's presence in their lives. As the months went by, Richard noticed that Anastasia was becoming increasingly distant and cold. She would often find excuses to avoid spending time with Anthony, and she would sometimes make snide comments about him behind his back. Richard tried to brush it off, thinking that Anastasia was just adjusting to the new dynamics of their family. However, deep down, he knew that something was not quite right. Despite Anastasia's coldness, Anthony continued to thrive in his new environment. He was a hard worker and was determined to make a good life for himself. Richard was proud of his son and was grateful to have him in his life. As the family's dynamics continued to shift, Richard couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He knew that Anastasia was not happy about Anthony's presence in their lives, and he worried about how this would affect their family in the long run. Little did he know, however, that Anastasia's resentment was only just beginning to simmer, and it would soon boil over into a deadly obsession. Anastasia's feelings of jealousy and insecurity were fueled by the fact that Anthony was now the sole heir to the family business. She had always envisioned one of her own daughters taking over the company, but now it seemed like that was never going to happen. But what really grated on Anastasia's nerves was the fact that Anthony was rich on both his father and mother's side. Sandra, Anthony's mother, came from a wealthy family, and Anthony had inherited a significant amount of money and property from her. This meant that Anthony was set for life, and he would never have to worry about money again. At exactly 2 years after Anthony came into their lives, Anastasia flipped with growing resentment that she couldn't bear anymore. She began to plot against Anthony. She started to think of ways to get rid of him, to eliminate him from their lives once and for all. She knew that she had to be careful, that she couldn't just do something rash and impulsive. She needed to come up with a plan that would ensure that Anthony was out of the picture for good. After weeks of planning and scheming, Anastasia finally came up with a plan. She would lace Anthony's plate with a special type of poison, a poison that would not be detected by an autopsy. The poison was a rare and exotic substance, one that Anastasia had obtained through her connections with some shady characters. Anastasia waited for the perfect moment to put her plan into action. She waited until Anthony was over for dinner, until he was relaxed and off his guard. Then, she made her move, carefully lacing Anthony's plate with the poison. As Anthony ate his dinner, Anastasia watched with a sense of satisfaction. She knew that it wouldn't be long before Anthony was out of the picture for good. She just had to wait for the poison to take effect, and then she would be free to live her life as she saw fit. But little did Anastasia know, her sinister plot was not as secret as she thought. Unbeknownst to her, a young woman had been recording her every move, and the evidence of her crime was about to be revealed. Anthony's death sent shockwaves through the family. Richard was devastated, and his daughters were heartbroken. They had grown to love Anthony like a brother, and his sudden passing was a tragedy. The family assumed that Anthony's death was related to complications from his bone marrow transplant 2 years ago. They had been warned about the risks of the procedure, and they thought that Anthony's body had simply been unable to recover. Anastasia, however, was secretly relieved. But unbeknownst to Anastasia, her sinister actions had been captured on camera. One of the leave-in maid's cousins, a young woman named Emily, had been using the house as a backdrop for her content creation. She had been recording videos and taking photos in the house, and she had inadvertently captured Anastasia's sinister actions on camera. But it wasn't until Anthony's death that Emily realized the significance of her recordings. She had been reviewing her footage, looking for something to post on her social media channels, when she stumbled upon a video that made her blood run cold. The video showed Anastasia lacing Anthony's plate with a mysterious substance. Emily had no idea what the substance was, but she knew that it couldn't be good. She watched in horror as Anastasia carefully placed the plate in front of Anthony, and she knew that she had to do something. Emily decided to take her evidence to the police. She knew that it wouldn't be easy, but she couldn't just sit back and do nothing. She had to make sure that justice was served, and that Anastasia was held accountable for her actions. Anastasia was caught off guard by the police's questions. She had thought that she had gotten away with her crime, and she wasn't prepared for the scrutiny that she was now facing. She tried to maintain her composure, but it was clear that she was hiding something. As the investigation continued, the police began to uncover more evidence of Anastasia's guilt. They found a suspicious substance in the kitchen, and they discovered that Anastasia had been researching poisonous substances online. It was clear that Anastasia was guilty of Anthony's murder, and the police were determined to bring her to justice. They arrested her and charged her with murder, and she was taken away in handcuffs. As the trial approached, Anastasia's fate was all but sealed. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and it was clear that she was guilty of Anthony's murder. The judge and jury would have no choice but to convict her, and she would likely spend the rest of her life behind bars. As the verdict was read, Anastasia showed no emotion. She simply stood up, looked straight ahead, and walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by guards. She knew that she had lost everything, and that she would never be able to go back to her old life. Sandra, Anthony's mother, was devastated by the loss of her son. She had always known that Anastasia was not a good person, but she had never suspected that she was capable of something so heinous. Sandra was consumed by grief and anger, and she couldn't help but wonder how she had missed the signs. Richard and his daughters were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They had thought that they knew Anastasia, but it turned out that they had been living with a monster. The revelation of Anastasia's true nature had left them all reeling, and they were struggling to come to terms with what had happened. As the days turned into weeks, Richard and his daughters began to rebuild their lives. They started attending therapy sessions to deal with the trauma they had experienced, and they slowly began to heal. Richard was grateful to have his daughters by his side, and he vowed to do everything in his power to protect them and keep them safe. What lessons do you think society can learn from this case? Share your thoughts below. If you found this story compelling, please consider sharing it to spread awareness. Like this video, subscribe to uncover more true crime stories where deception and truth collide. Click here to watch another chilling case in our series.